It looks like the planes are finally in place. I have Yahoo Sports' Cassandra Negley here to discuss how the WNBA got to this moment where charter flights became the law of the land. The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast, it starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome. You are Locked On to Women's Basketball. I'm Jackie Powell. I'm one of your hosts on this program, usually on Fridays. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next, and I've covered women's basketball nationally at many other places. We want to thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every single day. And remember that Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by everyone at the Next, a place where we cover women's basketball all the time, and we tell the stories that need to be told every day. Subscribe now to support the staff at the Next that works oh so hard to bring you the coverage that matters oh so much. It's $9 a month or $72 per year. Find us at thenexthoops.com and subscribe. And remember that this podcast is free and available on all platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and many more. Today's sponsor or title sponsor is LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So last time we were together, dear listener, I had the one and only Howard Megdal on to discuss his new book, Rare Gems. He explained what a rare gem is and what the story he chronicled about Minnesota women's basketball history informs us about the present, the future of the sport. So check that out if you missed it. But today, I have the one and only Cassandra Negley here to break down the why and the how when it came to the WNBA flipping the switch and making charter flights the way teams travel. So in segment one, we're going to talk about why WNBA players having charter flights really matters. Segment two, we're going to talk about some of the questions that this timing and rollout really made us think about. And then in segment three, rather, we're going to discuss why this was done unilaterally as a league and what charter flights now might mean for up-and-coming CBA negotiations. But anyway, Cassandra, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me. It's been a fun, 2 first weeks of the WNBA season. So I'm taking a quick breather, and it's always fun in the W.
Absolutely. I think, and it's also always interesting in the W,
yes.
Which is what we love.
Yes.
So the first thing I think I want to get into with you is just very simply, why do charter flights matter for WNBA players at this moment?
Yeah. So I covered the Indiana Fever, their first 2 games, and have been following them closely. And I think they're actually a really great example of this. So they have the most games to start the first 12 days of the season of any team in the league. 7 games, 12 days. They don't have a homestand. So if you're the Indiana Fever, to fly commercially means that first game you're playing in Connecticut. After the game, you go back to your hotel. You have to sleep there. You're waking up first thing in the morning to drive to an airport. Connecticut is the worst travel location in the W, even though I enjoy it. You're traveling to the airport. You're getting there early. You're getting on the first flight out. You might have a connection to get back to Indianapolis. You're probably traveling most of the day, not at great times. There's a potential for a layover getting stuck. You're on cramped planes. You're going through big airports, etc. So that day is basically just done. You're not able to do much. You might be able to practice. When we talked to Christy Sides, she said if we were flying commercial, we might be able to practice late that night. You turn around and then on Thursday, you're playing a home game. And then you do it all over again the next day because you're traveling to another place for another game. I think in this case, it was New York. So charter flights allows them to finish the game, do their media availabilities, go straight to the airport, get on a charter plane, get home, get sleep, and you have a full day of rest and recovery.
That sounds like that would improve the quality of play, doesn't it?
Yes. And I think we both heard through this rollout when we were asking players, like, what does this mean? That was what a lot of them said, is you're going to see a better product on the court because they can recover. They can do things like ice baths. If they have a little minor injury, like taking care of that, proper practice time. When we talked to Caitlin Clark that first day about going into her first game, like that's one of the things she said was my approach to a game, like what I do before a game, is going to have to change because there are so many games close together.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I spoke to Brianna Stewart last night after the Liberties lost to the Chicago Sky, and I said to her, so, is the plane in place? Is it ready to go? You guys are traveling to Minneapolis. And she said, yes, the plane is in place. And she sort of laid out what today is going to look like for the Liberty, which this will be their first charter flight. She said, okay, we'll wake up in the morning, Friday morning. So this morning we'll watch film at Barclays Center. That probably has already happened. Then they will drive to John F. Kennedy Airport, JFK Airport. And they will get on their charter flight. Their charter flight will be, or their plane will be at JFK all season long. So gone are the days where teams are trying to figure out which airport to go to because there is a certain flight that only leaves from a certain time. So that's part of it too, is that there's some stability here for WNBA players. Also, there's no waiting in the airport anymore. They do not have to get harassed or heckled by people. I'm sure you all remember what happened to Brittany Griner less than a year ago when in a Dallas airport, she was heckled by a conservative news person. And that was very disturbing for her and her team. I mean, Cassandra, I'm sure with the Indiana Fever, having more and better security means a lot.
Yeah, that's one thing that I heard from, especially like newer fans kind of getting involved, was when we all said charter flights are important because of security. I heard a lot of like, well, we all go through TSA. What's the big deal? These players have a bigger profile than they have ever had. You look at someone like Caitlin Clark, and I've covered her pretty closely since January. Like, there's a lot of security at Iowa games. It feels a little tighter. We all know that there's a nation that knows her, whether it's watching basketball, Gatorade commercials. Like, for this rookie class coming in, this applies to like Stewie and Asia as they keep, adding brands to their portfolio. But for this rookie class coming in, this is the first time that we've had players who are really benefiting from name, image, likeness in college, who everyone knows. And so to put them through an airport, exactly like you said, does put them a little at risk. Even if people have the best intentions, there's so much interest in them that they're drawing crowds.
Yeah, I mean, last night with Angel Reese here in New York, I happened to see a fan tweet something about the fact that security was much more strict than they've ever really experienced for WNBA games at Barclays. they wanted to get an autograph from Angel Reese, and security sort of limited that a little bit more. So that factors into this as well. Before we head to our second segment, I do want to touch on the significance of the fact that just yesterday, the WNBA announced that there will be an expansion team in Toronto. So on the subject of why charters matter, I mean, a new team in Toronto and not having charter flights, what would have been the potential problem there?
When we were talking about expansion the past few years and Toronto kept bubbling up, like, first of all, congrats to Toronto. Great place to have a team. We've seen so much interest there. But to fly commercially there means you're having to go through customs. Like, it's so much longer. There's probably, I haven't looked at everyone's airplane schedule, but there's probably less direct flights to Toronto. So you're talking more difficult travel. I think they had to go hand in hand, whether it's announced now or it was part of the CBA negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting during Cathy Engelbert's presser announcing the news yesterday. She was asked, was there sort of a link between the charters being now the law of the land and announcing the Toronto expansion team? She sort of denied there being sort of a link there. And she spoke about how when it came to charters, the reason for why now was because the league had the money. And that's something that we will get into coming up. This notion of the league now having the money and why there were some questions about this rollout. But first, I do want to talk to you all about our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. And so, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right pros for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to the professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, make the process even easier and quickly. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions applied. Thank you very much, LinkedIn. We appreciate you. And we are back. So I'm here with Cassandra Negley. We are talking about the WNBA and its new charter flight program. But before we get to this bumpy rollout and the questions we have, are you watching ESPN or Fox Sports on your TV all day? You have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Okay, Cassandra, so let's sort of start with how this all began to happen. Why do we keep saying that this rollout has been bumpy?
Oh, you want me to answer that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the rollout has been bumpy because this first kind of floated out at the Associated Press sports editor meeting, where it was reported that Cathy Engelbert said charters were coming. I don't remember her exact quote, but it was basically when we get the planes. It took a few days for the WNBA to formally announce that there would be charters. And once again, it was still a little squishy, as we would say. Her quote was, as soon as practical for the 2024 and 2025 seasons. So already when you saw that, you knew that wasn't going to be super smooth. And then, of course, Indiana chartered to Connecticut to start the season, and I believe Minnesota chartered to Seattle to start the season. They were the only two to charter, and it took a little while to get everyone to charter. The league announced that as of Tuesday, all teams would be chartering.
Yeah, the other thing there with some of this bumpiness that I think is worth noting is that the teams had close to no idea that any of this was happening until we also found out.
Yeah.
And what makes that really bumpy is when Cassandra was discussing the commercial flight process in segment 1, that's the work of general managers and basketball ops people that are scheduling these commercial flights months in advance before the season.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the league says, oh, okay, well, we're doing charters now, that all goes out the window. There were general managers that were saying, are we getting refunded for this? What is happening? How logistically is this all going to work? So that also contributed to this being a bit bumpy, in addition to the fact that not all teams were starting their charter flights at the same time. And I think what led to some controversy, and Cassandra, you could expand upon this, was this idea of competitive advantage being at the forefront of the charter flight discussion.
Yeah, we definitely saw a lot of this kind of idea that for years, competitive advantage has been thrown around as why. It was written in the CBA. I think this is also an important point. It is written in the CBA that teams have to fly commercially. And there have been teams over the years who have tried to fly charter, teams like the Liberty, who were fined for doing it a few years ago under their new ownership. Mark Davis and the Aces, they had kind of tried to skirt the rules and use JSX, and they were not allowed to last year. And the idea is that basically everyone charters or no one charters. So you roll out a charter flight program and suddenly some people are chartering and some people aren't. There were a lot of questions about how that was fair. And I think there's a lot of people who are saying if not everyone could charter at the same time, maybe wait until they could.
Yeah, you saw that with the situation of the Washington Mystics recently. Apparently, the reason for why Indiana and Minnesota were given that preference or that prioritization was because either their routes were very difficult. As we said earlier, traveling to Connecticut from any part of the country is just very difficult because of where Mohegan Sun is in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. But when it came to the Lynx going out to Seattle, that was because it was a cross-country flight. And so when the Mystics were getting ready to go out to Los Angeles and then do their West Coast road trip of LA and then Phoenix, they were like, well, excuse me, well, what about us? We're doing a cross-country trip.
Yeah, I know we're going to get into like a lot of the questions that there still are. But it's certainly like the joke is, as soon as we get the planes in place, like maybe there wasn't a plane in place for them to easily take. But I think players and teams, and as you said, like general managers who did this work have a reason to be irritated. Certainly great that charters are here. And I think certainly like there should be a little bit of grace for the league trying to get this in place. I know that the league is just juggling a lot with a few people right now and this just skyrocketing interest. But you look at a team like Washington and they should have chartered. Like, we've all flown cross country. It's not super fun.
No. And it takes, and going back to why these charters matter, when you're on a long flight, it takes a toll on your body. When you're sitting next to people, you know, as we saw in some of the video footage from the Indiana Fever getting on their charter, these players were able to stretch out. They had so much leg room. That's a huge difference from being squished next to two people or squished next to one person or having to deal with a flight attendant that is moving up through the lane. Just looking at some other frustrations, there was a comment from Sophie Cunningham this week where she had a similar sentiment. She said, listen, I'm so thankful that charters are here. But she sort of talked about this competitive advantage again. And she told media that her team's plane is apparently too small. There are other teams that get bigger charter planes. So she goes, if you want to talk about a competitive advantage, that's one right there, that our team has to be split up and our bags don't even get to travel with us. And so she doesn't necessarily mean the teammates or the players. She means the staffers, the basketball ops people, the performance team. So those folks and their bags are being split up, which she goes on to say, social media makes everything sound so great and butterflies and rainbows now that we have the charters. But half the teams don't have a proper charter to fly with your whole team. So we are grateful, but there's still work to be done.
Yeah, these are kind of the pain points that happen when it seems like, roll it out pretty quickly on late notice. And hopefully they're ironed out soon.
Yeah, on that note of just sort of the bumpy rollout, Cassandra, you and I spoke before pressing record, but what are some of the questions that you still have about how this all came together? Because I know I have a bunch.
I want to hear your questions, but because I have some thoughts on your questions, but my biggest question is just like, how did this come to be? Like, what was the prompting? Because we were all at the draft. We all know the quick turnaround. We were all at the draft, and Cathy, as she always is, was asked about charters. And she had mentioned that, they were chartering back-to-backs. They were chartering the full playoffs. I think there were a few like other minor things. And that was a growth from previous years. Like, they, to their credit, have slowly introduced more and more charters that they are paying for to try and help these teams and this situation. We know that it's an Olympic year. There's a lot more back-to-backs, a lot more condensed schedulings. Like, this kind of had to happen. On that note, like, I did some research last year about charters, and that was a big thing for baseball, was because they play so many games, like, owners just paid for charters. You had to. So my question is, like, what happened to have this kind of like rushed announcement, and then suddenly planes are in some places and not in some places, and the rocky rollout? And yeah, number one question, just like, what happens?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot about what I've been thinking as well. And I think more specifically, in building off of your questions, when Cathy Engelbert was asked exactly what you said yesterday when the Toronto team was officially announced, she talked about the fact that the league is at a point where ticket sales, franchise health, corporate and media partners, they all came together and helped make the financial model work now. When I spoke to Brianna Turner last night, I said, well, why do you think this is happening now? She said, well, during our players' call with the commissioner, Cathy Engelbert said that they just sort of found the money. The question is, how exactly did they find this money? What type of corporate partners are we talking about? What media partners are we talking about that helped this happen? And how did this all happen in less than a year? Because when you have Brittany Griner having to suffer, mentally, maybe physically too, from what happened to her in that Dallas airport, it's not a great look. It's really, it's really hard when you have Caitlin Clark come into this league and be part of the first team to use a charter flight. As you noted before, flying to Connecticut is a pain, and I understand that. But when you just think about where the league was around a year ago, and the fact that players were dealing with these same issues, and that you had one of the most recognizable people in the country in Brittany Griner not able to be as safe as she should be, I just sort of want to know, how did this math change? What types of discussions were had? How did Delta finally just get on board? What was the process in getting them on board? Delta is providing the planes. So how did we really get from point A to point B here? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. I think too, like, being mum about it just opens up a lot of this, like you mentioned, like the optics look bad. So like one kind of theory I guess I do have is they raised that 75 million a couple years ago. And that's what a lot of people are talking about. And players are saying, like, where's that money going? Like, that's been sitting here. Why didn't we use it? Cathy has always talked about the financial viability of the league and making sure she doesn't jeopardize the league and its future. I think, like, if I'm putting myself in a commissioner chair, I see the growth, right? I see jersey sales are going up, viewership is going up, attendance, interest, people talking about the league, the visibility of the players, which has been a huge thing for Cathy. If I see that going up, if I'm already chatting about media rights deals, which are a big part of this, she's always said when we get a good media rights deal that brings in a lot more money for things like charter, you're now like a couple of years away from that. You're very close. So if you see the money coming in from that, if you see the growth of the league where more money is coming in, and you see, like you had said, like you've already had one PR nightmare about this, you're going to have more. There's no doubt about it. So then maybe that's what makes you say, okay, I have this money in the bank. Let me take it, pay for charters for 2 years. We'll discuss it as part of the CBA because I see more money coming into this league to like refill my coffers. But we don't know because we don't have answers.
That would definitely make rational sense. But as you said, we have not had a formal press conference besides the press conference welcoming Toronto to the W to really get into this. But anyway, coming up, we are going to get more into what Cassandra just previewed, which is how does this impact the future CBA negotiations and why was this done unilaterally? But first, I do want to talk to all of y'all about our friends at eBay Motors. So, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. I also want to talk to you all about a product that I've been using lately, and this is Apostrophe. When temperatures are starting to warm up, we're so excited that summer is finally here, or technically it still's around the corner, but we're feeling it and we're ready to get moving when it comes to going to the beach. For me, it's swimming. I love swimming. And so if you're looking to get your skin glowing in time for these summer months, it's time to get started with Apostrophe. And so Apostrophe's goal is to help you feel confident in your skin. Whether you're dealing with breakouts, signs of aging, or acne scarring, Apostrophe will help you love the skin you're in. What Apostrophe does is it's an online platform that connects you to an expert dermatology team that gets customized acne treatment for your skin. So for me, it's dealing with hormonal outbreaks. So you sort of plug that in online, you take some pictures of what you're dealing with, and then that's your consultation. And then you're sort of sent the medicine that is recommended. Apostrophe also helps with pimple size and decreases redness. So we have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/lockedon. When you use our code LOCKEDON, there's a savings of $15. This code is only available to our listeners at Locked On Women's Basketball. Anyway, thank you very much, Apostrophe. And I can report that it does work and it does help. Anyway, we are back. We are talking about charter flights, but now we are talking about what this means for the future of CBA negotiations. And Cassandra, you began to talk about this at the end of segment 1. So I'll just ask you point blank, what does the league getting this done now mean for the next CBA negotiations?
Well, I think it gives them a little bit of a leg up, right? Because they've provided this thing that has been a pain point for players for a long time. Like, the 2020 CBA was huge. There were so many advantages for players in it, like a big step. When I've talked to Sue Bird about it, she said it was the CBA before the CBA. Like, in each one, you have to make incremental steps. Charter flights were not a part of that step that year. I think we all knew they were going to be a part of this next one coming up. And now the league has already made the move to say, hey, look, like, we're making sure we can take care of you and do these things that you want us to do.
So I just wonder, as you just said, it's like, okay, all eyes on the PA now. What exactly are they going to do to counter this? It has been reported that it is expected for the league to be opting out of the current CBA, and they would opt out in this November. So I guess what exactly can the Players Association bring to the table to sort of challenge and say, hey, yeah, this is great, but we also want this too?
Yeah, the players have been very open that they are opting out this year. They want to renegotiate it. As we said, it looked great in 2020. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, like a pandemic, like the growth of the league. So they want to readjust some things. When we talked to Stewie in Indiana, one of the things she said was, okay, like, the league gave us charter flights, and that, I don't want to say was against the CBA, but certainly will take, I think, like a letter of agreement is what it's called, to the CBA. So she said, well, what else is negotiable? But in terms of just big picture CBA, like, players want higher salaries. They are not happy or were not happy with prioritization. I'll be interested to see like how that plays into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a lot of talk about the league's revenue sharing, which that's been reported at around 10 or 11%. And in the 2020 CBA, there was this clause where it said we will start 50-50 revenue sharing when we cross a threshold. And you said just now there was a pandemic that sort of threw all of that out the window. So more of a 50-50 split when it comes to revenue sharing. I could also see the players saying, hey, like, yeah, you gave us charter flights, but these planes need to be the same size for every single team. And we need to be able to fly to Connecticut and to Indiana or Chicago, regardless of where we are located, because teams like New York, Connecticut, in Indiana and Chicago are at a bit of a disadvantage because we've learned that these charter flights won't be going from New York to Connecticut, Chicago to Indiana. Those shorter distances are going to be bust.
Also, maternity protections, right? That's a big thing that players have talked about for many years now. We've seen this kind of bubble up, the Dearica Hamby issue, which I think speaks to maternity protections, but also kind of the cap space that didn't move up with base salaries, but also like who gets to be on these charter flights? Like, are moms able to travel with their kids? What does that look like? Is that a part of it now that there are charter flights?
Well, there is a lot lying ahead, as there is always in the WNBA. But we want to thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to Cassandra for hopping on the show today. Cassandra, where can the people find your great work?
I'm on Twitter at Cass Negley, on Instagram, Cassandra.Negley. And of course, you can check out sports.yahoo.com for all of our amazing WNBA coverage.
Tomorrow, join M. Adler, Hunter Cruz, and Lincoln Schaefer, where they will be discussing what they've made of the 2024 draft class so far. This has been Jackie Powell and
Cassandra Negley.
And we are signing off. Have a great weekend.